Hey there, how there, ho there. It's Jeff Cutter Diamond. Welcome you to yet another Cutter Top 10 football video, and we're going to be looking at the top 10 NFL of all time. You can obviously know what it is. I don't want to make the gesture because that doesn't make sense. Anyway, so these are some of the greatest chokes of all time, in essence. And so, you know, that's just how things go. All right. Our first choke at number 10 is the Green Bay Packers Super Bowl 32 against the Broncos. Now, your definition of a choke may be different than what I am trying to present, but this definition of a choke is basically the fact that the Packers had a long winning streak on the line. And no, it was not a Green Bay winning streak, it was more of a NFC winning streak. You see, since 1984, when the LA Raiders beat the Washington Redskins in the Super Bowl, the NFC team had won every year. 85 was the Bears, then came, well, no, sorry, 85 came the Niners, then the Bears, then the Giants, then the Redskins, then the Niners, Giants, Redskins, Cowboys, Niners, Cowboys, Packers. So for 14 years, the AFC failed to win the Super Bowl, and only a few times it was actually close. So anyway, Denver with John Elway was probably his last chance, as it seemed. Pulled out all the stops, but suddenly the Green Bay Packers ended up taking care of the Denver Broncos. Behind you. Anyway, so the John Elway in his helicopter run, helicoptering over the defender and all that. The Broncos won 31-24, which got them the Super Bowl and all that. Number 9 is the New England Patriots against the Indianapolis Colts in the 2006 AFC title game. Well, 06-07. So, the New England Patriots, of course, Tom Brady looking pretty good. He almost always beat Peyton Manning. The Pats were up 21-3 at the half, and it looked like they were going to go to yet another Super Bowl. Yawn. Well, I'm a Patriots fan, so I wouldn't care. Unfortunately for the Patriots, they fumbled it. They lost the game 38-34. Peyton Manning finally got to the Super Bowl, and they beat the Bars to win the Super Bowl. So that was their job and all that, to win the Super Bowl. And that's what the Colts did. They ended up winning the Super Bowl and all that. Question on everyone's lips would be probably what would have happened if the Pats took on the Bears. Well, the Pats would have won the Super Bowl. uh, Number 8 on the list is a very heartbreaking job. It's the tale of the Denver Broncos in both the 2008 and 2009 seasons. As the Broncos had two golden chances to win divisions but couldn't finish the job. 2008 was one of the most heartbreaking because the Broncos had a 4-game lead on the San Diego Chargers. Yes, they were in San Diego at the time with 4 to play. So all the Broncos needed to do was have a win or a Chargers loss, and they would have won the division and been in the playoffs, obviously. But all of a sudden, the Denver Broncos forgot how to win. They lost their last 4 games. Well, the Chargers won their last 4 games and won the division. 2009, when Josh McDaniels became the head coach and all that, Denver thought they had a chance, but they fumbled again late. They were basically massive choke artists and all that. So, unfortunately, though, that did not work out so well. Number 7 is the 2014-15 NFC title game between the Packers and the Seahawks. The Green Bay Packers were looking pretty good. Aaron Rodgers was throwing the ball pretty good. They were taking down Seattle's legitimate defense. They were up 19-7. All they needed to do was just keep things going, and then we would see A-Rod versus Brady in the Super Bowl. Green Bay versus New England. However, there were a series of errors. There was that fumbled, like the fumbled onside kick. The backers had the ball for the onside kick and would have iced the game, but they fumbled it and the Seahawks recovered. John Ryan faked a punt and threw a touchdown pass, and the Seahawks won in overtime on Jermaine Curse's touchdown. That got them to the Super Bowl against the Pats, and they almost won the Super Bowl. They didn't let Beastquake be Beastquake. Stupid. Stupid, stupid. Number 6 on the list is the 1993 Miami Dolphins. This doesn't have to do with a playoff game. This has to practically do with one of the biggest regular season chokes of all time. I know you could say the Indianapolis Colts too, because they were 8-2 this season, 2025, and failed to make the playoffs. But the fact of the matter is that the Dolphins were a bigger choke. The '93 Dolphins were 9-2, and how do you miss the playoffs when you start 9-2 in a 16-game schedule? Well, that was terrible. And to ratchet up the degree of difficulty, Dan Marino was hurt in week 5 or 6, whatever it was. Dan Marino was hurt, and yet the Dolphins still did their job. Steve DeBerg tried his best to be quarterback for Miami and didn't do the job. They even had a young guy by the name of Scott Mitchell do it. Do it. And before Detroit gave him the bag for that big free agent signing that went poof out of nowhere. So the Dolphins when they went 9-2, their ninth win was on Thanksgiving against the Dallas Cowboys. Yeah, yes, that was the Leon Lett game in which Stojanovic had his kick blocked, and all the Dallas had to do was just let the ball roll, and they would have won the game. Unfortunately, Leon Lett, in his attempt to probably try to get the ball, slid and touched the ball, and then Miami recovered it. Miami kicked a quick field goal, won the game, and 9-2. And was also the year that Don Shula broke the great George Halas's record for most regular season wins by NFL head coach. Little did people know that the '93 Dolphins, this would be their high water point, and they would lose the next 5 games. Game number 16 was a heartbreaker against the New England Patriots in what is called one of the greatest final weeks of the season, the 93-94 season, because that was also the week that Dallas and the Giants were going to play for the division and the 1 seed. Something that San Francisco and Seattle did for 2025. Nevertheless, the Dolphins would play the Patriots, and they actually had a touchdown taken away from them incorrectly, as the receiver did have 2 feet in the end zone, and they thought it was 1. Unfortunately, instant replay was not there in '93, and it screwed the Dolphins over. The Patriots would win that game. But yeah, I feel so bad for them. I really do. Number 5 is the worst regular season choke or best regular season comeback, whatever you want to call it, in history. It was the Indianapolis Colts Minnesota Vikings from 2022. This was an amazing game and all that. The the Indianapolis Colts were playing in Minnesota in a game on the NFL Network. Noah Eagle, as in Ian Eagle's son, and Nate Burleson were on the call. Indy scored first on a field goal by Chase McLaughlin, then a block punt return for a touchdown by the Colts, and then Matt Ryan, who was the quarterback, threw a quick pass to Deion Jackson to make it 17-0. In the second quarter, McLaughlin made 3 field goals, and Julian Blackman made a pick 6. Colts were up 33-0. Minnesota would get a touchdown from Kirk Cousins to KJ Osborne to make it 33-7 in the third quarter. And then McLaughlin kicked a field goal to make it 36-7. Colts were up by 29. But then CJ Ham ran a touchdown, 36-14. Justin Jefferson got a touchdown pass with 12:53 to go in the game, 36-21. And then Kirk Cousins threw a pass to Allen Phelan with 5.5 minutes left, 36-28. And then Cousins with a improbable touchdown throw to Dalvin Cook. They went for 2, and Cousins passed to Hawkinson. And then all of a sudden, Greg Joseph, with barely any time left on the overtime clock, kicked the field goal and prevented the Colts from winning the game. This was just unreal. The Colts would fall out of playoff position once Jacksonville beat the Jets. Nick Foles would be named to be the Colts starting quarterback. And Sam Ehringer would play in the season finale. The Colts ended up being 4-12-1. They took Anthony Richardson 4th overall in the draft from the University of Florida, but he has not proven himself to be the main guy. And the Colts have had to use Philip Rivers, especially him having to come back from retirement. The Vikings ended up 13-4. They won the NFC North and got third in the playoff seeding. So anyway, they actually became the first team in NFL history to win 13 games and to actually have a negative point differential. The Giants ended up beating the Vikings in the wild card round, which was a massive shock. Of course, this was Matt Ryan's final game in the NFL and all that. So that was just brutal. It was. Number 4 is the Minnesota Vikings choking against the Atlanta Falcons in the NFC title game. This was just brutal. The 98 Minnesota Vikings were hot, hotter than a pistol. A revigorated Randall Cunningham became a pocket passer instead of a running quarterback. He threw those touchdowns to the young rookie from Marshall by the name of Randy Moss. Maybe you've heard of him. Randy Moss basically proved everyone wrong by passing him, especially Dallas in that famous Thanksgiving Day performance. 3 catches, 3 touchdowns. And they were all long touchdown catches, too. So anyway, they were 15-1, losing to Tampa in week 6, I think, or 7. I can't remember. But yeah, the Vikings were pretty impressive and all that. Gary Anderson had actually made every field goal an extra point, which was hard to do because you're bound to miss 1 or 2 field goals. So the Vikings would play the Atlanta Falcons in the NFC title game, and Gary Anderson had a chance to kick a field goal at 27-20 to make it 30-20 and almost put the game out of reach. But somehow, inexplicably, he missed the field goal going wide left, and it's in a dome too, the Metrodome. So there was like no excuse for the weather. Falcons scored in the final minute on a Terrence Mathis touchdown catch from Chris Chandler, and then Morgan Anderson kicked the winning field goal with 5 minutes left, and the Falcons were going to the Super Bowl. They did fall to John Elway's last ride as an NFL quarterback. People forget that the Atlanta Falcons actually were no slouches, despite the fact that they beat the Minnesota Vikings who were 15-1. Atlanta was no slouch. They actually won 14 games that year. People forget about that. That Atlanta actually had 14 wins that year. Anyhow, number 3 is Super Bowl 42, my personal pain, as it was the Patriots Giants in Super Bowl 42 in 2008. The Pats were amazing. 17-0. They had several wins where they got by the seat of their pants. Randy Moss got the most touchdown receptions in the season. Tom Brady got the most touchdown passes in the season. They beat the New York Giants in the final week in a game that NFL Network and CBS and NBC actually broadcast, having multi-network thing, and over 28 million people watched. The Patriots ended up undefeated in the regular season, something only the Dolphins did post-merger, and that was the 72-73 Dolphins that finished unscathed. The Pats would go on to beat who did they beat? I can't remember who they beat. I would say Texans, but they're wrong. I can't remember who they beat the first game, but they beat the San Diego Chargers with a ailing Philip Rivers at quarterback to face the New York Giants in the Super Bowl. The Giants were not expected to get there. Eli was a pretty good quarterback. The Giants were expected to lose in Tampa in the wild card round. Didn't happen. They were expected to lose to Tony Romo, Terrell Owens, and the number 1 seeded Dallas Cowboys. Didn't happen. They were expected to lose in the cold in Green Bay against Brett freaking Favre. Guess what? They didn't. And it was Brett Favre's fault. Despite 2 missed field goals by ex-CFL Lawrence Tynes, Tynes still had a chance because Favre got too macho through a pathetic playoff interception, and the Giants scored the winning field goal. Tynes got redemption. Pats faced the Giants. It was a close game. The Pats were winning until on 3rd and 5, Eli scrambled out of a sack. He was close to being called for a sack because even though he wasn't down because his forward momentum was about to be stopped. However, he managed to finagle out of the sack and then throw a long pass that David Tyree, who really wasn't known in the NFL, basically stuck the ball on his helmet to prevent Ronnie Harrison from grabbing the ball. Giants scored a touchdown with Plaxico Burress, touchdown, and it was the worst loss in Patriots history. I feel that way. Worst of all for the Pats is that Tom Brady didn't get a chance to redeem himself because game one against the Chiefs, poof, ACL, he's out for the year. Nearly went to the playoffs, but fucking Chad Pennington screwed us over. And Brett Favre as well. Number two is the what they call the comeback in Buffalo, but the choke if you live in Houston. And that's why Houston was kind of called Choke City because their teams kept choking. The Astros were not really that great. Well, in 1980, they botched the NLCS to the Philadelphia Phillies. In 81, they had a 2 games lead on the Dodgers in the LDS and failed. And in 1986, they couldn't beat the Mets because Mike Scott couldn't pitch every game. The basketball team, the Rockets, were decent. They got to the 1981 and 86 finals. Were not expected to make the finals those 2 years, but got creamed by Boston both years. Um, the football team, the Houston Oilers, they had a couple chances late in the 70s for Earl Campbell, but they couldn't beat the Steelers. And Houston didn't have a hockey team in the NHL. But anyway, Houston was up 35-3 thanks to a Bubba McDowell pick six in the third quarter. Jim Kelly got injured. Ironically, the Bills actually faced the Oilers in the final regular season game, but in Houston. Jim Kelly got knocked out. He could not play the game, so Frank Reich had to come in. It was 35-3. Everyone thought Houston was going to head to Pittsburgh for the playoffs, but did not happen. Buffalo came back in dramatic fashion. James Lofton caught a touchdown. Don Beebe caught a couple plays, and so did Andre Reed. Houston had to kick a field goal to force overtime, but they had the ball to start overtime, and Houston could have avoided a slouch. One problem though, they couldn't. They threw an interception, and then Steve Christie, the pride of Oakville, kicked the winning field goal through the uprights in Buffalo, where it's going to move on to the next round. Houston choked and all that. Buffalo would go on to beat Dan Marino and the Dolphins in the AFC final to get to their third straight Super Bowl, but that Super Bowl they were blasted by Dallas 55-17. No, 52-17, excuse me. Houston didn't fall flat completely after that. They did play the 93 season and they were pretty much a pretty good team. They won 11 straight games. They were actually the team to beat. A lot of people thought Houston was going to get to the Super Bowl in 1994, but they choked to Joe Montana and the Kansas City Chiefs. And of course, who could forget who was that tight end name? I would say J.J. Burden, but that can't be the right guy. Oh, Keith Cash. The presence of mind of Keith Cash, the Kansas City tight end, to throw the football into the snout of a Buddy Ryan poster. So anyway, that was huge. But they choked, and then of course Houston lost their team because of apathy. And number one is 28-3. Need I say more? Well, actually, I should say more. So anyway, the New England Patriots were looking high as a kite. Tom Brady was looking pretty impressive. The Pats were looking pretty good. They would face the Atlanta Falcons. Matt Ryan was named the MVP, Matty Ice. And it was almost like it's a jinx because you're an MVP that goes to the Super Bowl, you might choke. But the Falcons were up 23. I basically turned the game off. Of course, as a Patriots fan, I'm like, wow, we're going to suck so badly. But all of a sudden, off screen, the Patriots came back. Julian Edelman made a fantastic catch. The Falcons screwed up by not running the ball enough. And the Pats scored a quick touchdown and 2-point convert in the final minute to force overtime. I actually was going to check Facebook for how badly the Falcons beat the Pats. But all of a freaking sudden, I saw the scoreline. They're going to overtime. And I'm like, what? So I turned the game on, which I didn't miss much in overtime. And then, of course, James White gets a touchdown. The Pats beat the Falcons. Beautiful. I couldn't believe it that my Pats would win the Super Bowl. I know, hate me as you need to because I'm a Patriots fan, but I have 6 Super Bowl rings to shut you up. Sorry, but that's how I do it. Anyhow, I'm Jeff. I'm gonna do